Have you ever wondered what happens when you add fluorescent pigment to a speed paint medium? Well, we're going to find out today. First of all, we're going to need a very clean paint palette. Close enough. I'm starting by pouring out a small amount of speed paint medium from Army Painter. Since I'm just playing around today, this isn't an exact science, so we're going to go with about that much. The first pigment I'm testing today is this incredibly vibrant pink fluorescent pigment. All of the pigments I'm using today are from Green Stuff World, but I'm intrigued to see how other pigments will work in the future. Something I learnt very quickly is when you're working with pigment, you have to be so careful. This stuff will stain everything. I wanted to slowly mix the medium and pigment together so not to add too many bubbles to the mix, but as you'll see throughout this video, that's nearly impossible. I wanted to try the mix out on a very subtly textured base first to see how the paint flowed. I was pleasantly surprised to have got the ratio correct, as the paint was really nice to work with on the brush, and it was obvious that these colours were going to pop. I discovered pretty quickly that you really don't need a lot on your brush for the vibrancy to come through, especially over a bright white undercoat. Let's try this mix on a model now. Here is an orc. This orc is going to a rave. I have to admit, I was laughing throughout this whole process due to how ridiculously vibrant this paint was. The camera does its best to pick it up, but it still doesn't do it justice. And here's the side-by-side comparison. You can see on the model the paint has acted as a speed paint should and flowed into the recesses despite how bright it is. Next up we have this yellow, and I really wasn't sure this was going to be picked up in the footage, since when I've shown this while streaming it usually blows out the exposure on my cameras. First up is the base, and I can only describe this paint as offensively bright. I felt like I was painting with a highlighter pen. Once I moved onto the model, this paint was an absolute joy to work with. It fell into the recesses nicely, leaving a very subtle highlight on the raised sections. Here's the side by side. Fortunately, my camera's exposure survived this encounter and lives to record another day, but you can see it struggling with those very bright edges. Next up is the blue, and as soon as I opened the bottle, I had a feeling this one was going to act differently. When mixed with the medium, the blue was a lot less vibrant than the pink and yellow, and there were times I forgot I was working with a paint I mixed myself. This was very similar to the pre-mixed speed paint Magic Blue, but it still flowed nicely off the brush. On both the base and the model, this blue was the one that gave the most variation in the shadows and highlights so far. I did find it starting to leave a couple of drying lines here and there, so maybe I didn't put enough pigment in the mix, as this one definitely felt a little weaker when applying it all over the model, especially the flatter surfaces like the axe and sword blade. Last up is this very rich purple. When I opened this pot, I thought I was going to have a similar experience to the blue, but it turned out to be somewhere in between. On the base, the purple covered really well, and there wasn't much on my brush at all. On the model, however, I felt like I had to really load up the brush to get the colour to come across. This resulted in this beautiful light pink on the highlights, fading down to that rich dark purple I saw when I first opened the pigment up. The side-by-side reflects this, as you can see the difference between the flat surface on the base and all the texture on the skin, armour and clothes, especially on that shield. So, looking back at the colours, I think the ones that worked the best were definitely the pink and the yellow, whereas the blue and the purple didn't quite pop as much as I hoped. So, what do you think? Can you see yourself trying this technique and mixing up your own speed paints? What would you use this technique for? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and thanks for watching.